The room buzzed with quiet conversations, the kind that fill the air when everyone is waiting for something to happen. At the center, a polished black piano stood under the soft glow of the lights. Its keys looked smooth and perfect, almost as if they were inviting someone to play. A small group had gathered in this cozy hall, some standing, some sitting, all curious about the little event that was about to unfold. Among them, a young woman stood a little to the side, her hands nervously fidgeting, her eyes fixed on the piano. She wasn't tall or striking in any way, and if someone passed by quickly, they might not notice her at all. But inside, she carried a quiet fire, a love for music that had grown silently for years. She had learned to play the piano in a small room at home, practicing whenever she could find the time. Her parents had never been rich, and the piano in her home was an old, slightly chipped instrument that had been in the family for generations. But she loved it more than anything. The sound of the keys beneath her fingers always felt like a conversation with the world, a language that needed no words. And although she played mostly in private, dreaming of moments like this, she had never let anyone witness the depth of her skill. Across the room, a man leaned casually against a wall, arms crossed. His presence seemed larger than the room itself. He had an air of confidence, almost arrogance, and he liked to make sure everyone noticed him. He had a reputation for being good at everything he tried, or at least for convincing people he was. And now standing there, he looked at her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So this is her?" he said loudly, his voice carrying across the room. A few heads turned. "The one they say can play the piano?" The young woman's stomach tightened. She kept her eyes on the piano, pretending not to notice him. But she felt every stare, every whisper, every doubt that hung in the air like a shadow. He laughed, a sound that cut through the quiet murmurs. "I've seen better from beginners," he added, his tone dripping with mockery. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" A few people around exchanged uneasy glances. Some laughed along nervously, not wanting to be rude, while others looked embarrassed for the woman. She felt heat rush to her cheeks, but she didn't respond. Instead, she took a slow breath, trying to steady her hands and calm her racing heart. Inside, she reminded herself that this was not about him or about anyone else. It was about the music. It was about the years she had spent alone in her small room, practicing late into the night, letting her fingers explore every note, every chord, every rhythm. She remembered the countless times she had closed her eyes and let the music guide her, feeling it in her chest and her fingertips. She had dreamed of moments like this, not for praise but for the chance to share the sound that lived in her soul. The man, meanwhile, continued to jeer, making small jokes and trying to get a reaction. "Come on, don't be shy. Let's hear something. Surely you can't be that bad." His tone was casual, but it carried a sharp edge. He was used to being the center of attention, and he didn't like anyone else stepping into that spotlight. Some of the people in the room started whispering among themselves. "Do you think she can really play? I heard she's good, but I wouldn't be so sure." The murmurs added weight to the tension in the room, a mixture of doubt, curiosity, and the thrill of witnessing what might be an unexpected performance. The young woman walked slowly toward the piano, her movements measured and deliberate. She kept her gaze low, her fingers brushing lightly against the keys as if greeting old friends. She could feel the man's eyes on her, heavy with judgment, but she didn't look up. She focused on the piano, on the space in front of her, on the moment she had been preparing for without anyone knowing. As she sat down, the chair creaked slightly under her weight. She adjusted her posture, keeping her back straight but relaxed. Her hands hovered above the keys, trembling just a little, not from fear but from the intensity of anticipation. She had imagined this moment thousands of times, but now that it was here, it felt bigger than anything she had felt before. The man smirked, clearly expecting her to hesitate or make a mistake. "Well," he said, leaning slightly forward. "Don't be shy. Play something." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. She only needed to do what she had always done. Let the music speak for her. Her fingers finally touched the keys and a small soft note rang out. It wasn't loud or showy, but it had a warmth that filled the room in a way words never could. The sound made a few people stop mid-breath, as if they hadn't expected the piano to sound so alive. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of years of practice guide her. She remembered the first time she had played a difficult piece and felt the notes flowing through her, The first time someone had nodded in quiet approval without saying much, and the countless evenings she had spent alone with her music, feeling both lonely and complete at the same time. The man's smile faltered slightly. He had expected hesitation, uncertainty, perhaps even embarrassment. But the note that came from her hands had a confidence and clarity that he hadn't anticipated. His eyes narrowed, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. The young woman took another breath and prepared to continue. But before she did, she let the sound linger for a moment. It was like a question in the air, a silent challenge that spoke louder than any words. Could they hear her? Could they understand the story she had carried in her fingers all these years? Some of the people in the room shifted uncomfortably. The whispers stopped. The laughter faded. All eyes were now on her, waiting, watching, holding their breath as if afraid to interrupt the fragile magic that had just begun. The man, still leaning against the wall, tried to hide his surprise. His confidence had been shaken, but he was too proud to admit it. He laughed again, but this time it was quieter, less certain. Not bad, he muttered almost to himself. Maybe there's something there. But the young woman didn't pay attention. She didn't need his approval. All that mattered was the connection she felt with the piano, the way her hands knew what to do, the way the music seemed to flow out of her effortlessly despite the pressure of the room. As she lifted her fingers, preparing to play again, a strange calm washed over her. She realized that the laughter, the doubt, the judging eyes, it didn't matter. All that mattered was the sound she could make, the story she could tell without a single word. She let herself sink into the moment, feeling the piano as an extension of herself, and the room seemed to fade away. For the first time, she felt completely free. She was no longer the girl who practiced alone in a small room. She was the girl whose music could command attention, whose talent could make even the most confident skeptic pause. And though the man had laughed at her, though the room had waited to see her fail, she knew that when the right moment came, she would show them all what she was truly capable of. Her first note had been soft, almost humble, but it carried a promise that when she played fully, when she let her music speak, no one in the room would be able to ignore her. And she was ready for that moment. She took one last deep breath, her fingers hovering above the keys. The man's smirk had disappeared, replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. The others leaned in slightly, uncertain, tense, and eager. And in that quiet pause, in the space between her first note and what was to come, a sense of anticipation filled the room like electricity. She was ready. The piano was ready. And the world, even this small corner of it, was about to hear a sound that would stop them all in their tracks. She sat there, fingers poised just above the keys, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and determination. The first note had been just a taste, a whisper of what she could do, and now all eyes were on her. The room had gone almost silent, each person holding their breath, waiting for her next move. She could hear the faint shuffling of feet and the quiet creak of chairs, but her focus was entirely on the piano in front of her. She remembered the long nights she had spent practicing alone in a small, dimly lit room at home. The old piano had been her companion, its worn keys familiar and comforting. She had learned to play without anyone watching, perfecting her technique while imagining what it would feel like to perform in front of people. Back then, she had thought of these moments as distant dreams almost too far to reach. But now, here she was, and the dream was closer than ever. Her mind briefly wandered to the man leaning against the wall. His smirk had vanished, replaced by something she couldn't quite read. Was it curiosity? Confusion? Perhaps a touch of respect buried under his pride? She didn't know, and she didn't care. He had laughed at her, and the others had doubted her, but her music had always been for herself first. If they were astonished, that was a welcome bonus, but it wasn't the reason she played. Taking a deep breath, she let her hands settle on the keys. She felt the smooth surface beneath her fingers, the familiar grooves worn into the ivory from years of use. She felt the vibrations of the instrument, the subtle hum of possibility that came alive when someone was ready to play. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the memory of all her practice sessions guide her. Every lesson, every mistake, every triumphant chord played in the quiet of her room came together in that moment. The audience in the room leaned forward slightly, sensing that something different was about to happen. A few whispers began to rise, quiet enough not to disturb her, but loud enough for those around them to hear. "Do you think she'll really play something impressive? I didn't expect the first note to be that clear." She seemed so calm. The murmurs reflected the growing curiosity, the shift from doubt to anticipation. The man cleared his throat and straightened up, trying to regain his composure. He had expected a fumbling, timid performance, maybe a few awkward mistakes that would make everyone laugh along with him. But the first note had surprised him, and now he wasn't sure what to expect. He had always prided himself on being perceptive, able to judge people quickly, but she had proven him wrong immediately. He could feel a strange sense of unease building inside him. She began to play a slow, deliberate series of notes, each one careful and precise. She wasn't rushing, nor was she showing off. She wanted the music to speak clearly, to convey the feeling she had always carried inside. The room was quiet, but the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the sound of possibility, the energy of people realizing that they might witness something extraordinary. As she played, she noticed subtle changes in the room. The expressions of those watching shifted from mild curiosity to genuine interest. Eyebrows raised, eyes widened, and a few people exchanged glances that said without words, "I didn't expect this." The man's arms, once crossed in confident defiance, now hung loosely at his sides. He shifted from one foot to another, uncertain how to react. Her fingers danced lightly over the keys, each note flowing naturally into the next. She wasn't thinking about impressing anyone. She was simply playing, letting her hands do what they had learned over countless hours of practice. The music felt alive, almost like it had a life of its own. She felt a connection between her mind, her heart, and the piano. A harmony that made her forget everything else in the room. The man watched her closely now, his usual arrogance replaced by fascination. He tried to hide it with a faint smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He had underestimated her, and that realization made him uneasy. She wasn't just competent, she was extraordinary, and it was impossible to deny. He could feel the difference between someone who had learned a few songs and someone who had truly dedicated themselves to their craft. Around the room, other reactions were growing. Some people were nodding slightly, almost involuntarily in appreciation. A few leaned closer, drawn in by the clarity and emotion of the notes. There was no doubt anymore. This was not a beginner, not a casual player. This was someone who had poured their heart and soul into their music. She felt a small surge of confidence. The first note had broken the tension, and now she could let the music flow freely. Her hands moved faster, more assuredly, but never carelessly. She remembered a challenging piece she had mastered at home, one that required focus, precision, and feeling. She decided to play a part of it, not to show off, but because it reflected everything she had worked for. As she played, she could feel the eyes of the room on her, but they no longer frightened her. Instead, they fueled her determination. Each chord, each delicate note, built a story that no one could ignore. The music was speaking louder than words, telling them who she was, what she had endured, and the beauty she carried inside. The man, unable to stop himself, leaned closer, studying her hands. He could see the speed, the accuracy, and the grace of her movements. His earlier laughter seemed distant now, replaced by a quiet, uncomfortable admiration. He had not expected someone so unassuming to command attention so effortlessly. The young woman continued, her fingers gliding across the keys. She allowed herself to feel the emotion of the piece, letting it shape the rhythm and flow. She could sense the reactions around her. Some people were visibly moved, others looked stunned, and a few were simply watching in awe, unsure how to respond. The music had created a moment where words were unnecessary, where her presence and skill spoke louder than anything anyone could say. At one point, she paused briefly, letting the last note hang in the air. It was a soft, lingering sound, delicate but full of meaning. The room stayed quiet for a moment, caught in the spell of the music. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, a few people began to clap. The sound was hesitant at first, then grew louder until it filled the room. The man's expression changed completely. He no longer looked confident. He looked thoughtful, almost humbled. The laughter that had marked the beginning of the evening had vanished, replaced by a recognition he hadn't anticipated. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that talent couldn't be judged by appearances or casual observation. She opened her eyes and looked around, meeting the gaze of those watching her. There was no need to speak. The applause, the quiet awe, the astonished expressions, All of it said everything she wanted to communicate. She had been underestimated, doubted, even mocked, but now in this room she had shown them the truth. As she continued to play, she felt a sense of liberation. The weight of others' judgments, the pressure of expectation, all of it had melted away. This was her moment, and she was fully present in it. She wasn't performing for fame, recognition, or praise. She was playing because it was who she was, and because she had earned this opportunity through years of dedication. The man, still standing near the wall, finally spoke, though his voice was quieter than before. You really can play," he admitted, a note of surprise breaking through his usual arrogance. There was no mockery now, only acknowledgement. He had learned a lesson he hadn't expected. Never underestimate someone based on appearances or first impressions. The young woman smiled slightly, though she didn't stop playing. She didn't need to respond. Her music was her answer. Every note she struck told a story of perseverance, passion, and quiet strength. And as the room absorbed the sound, everyone present began to understand that this was more than a performance, it was a revelation. With each passing moment, the man's skepticism faded, replaced by a grudging respect. The others in the room were no longer talking, no longer whispering doubts. They were simply listening, captivated by the unexpected brilliance of her skill. The atmosphere had changed completely. What had started as a casual gathering, filled with doubt and amusement, had transformed into something remarkable. She finished the section she had been playing, letting the final chord resonate fully. The room stayed silent for a heartbeat longer, as if savoring the last sound. Then, almost together, everyone began to clap. The applause was spontaneous and genuine, a reflection of the astonishment and admiration that had grown steadily over the past few minutes. For a moment, she simply sat there, letting the sound of the piano and the reactions of the room sink in. She felt a quiet pride, not in proving anyone wrong, but in finally letting her music be heard. She had faced doubt, mockery, and skepticism, and yet here she was, standing in the truth of her own talent. The man, now fully attentive, nodded slowly. There was no smirk, no arrogance, only respect. He had learned something important that evening. That skill, passion, and dedication cannot be judged lightly, and that sometimes the quietest people carry the greatest surprises. She took a deep breath, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The moment had passed, but its impact would linger. She had faced judgment and laughter, yet she had responded not with anger or words, but with music. And in doing so, she had shown the power of talent, patience, and quiet confidence. The room had grown quiet again, the kind of silence that holds everyone's attention like a thin thread, stretched so tightly that even the faintest sound would snap it. She sat at the piano, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, feeling the familiar texture beneath her fingertips. She had played before, yes, and people had noticed, but she knew this was the moment that mattered most. One note, one perfect strike could change everything. It wasn't just about skill, it was about presence, emotion, and timing. She glanced briefly at the man across the room. He stood a little straighter now, eyes fixed on her, a mix of curiosity and disbelief in his expression. He had laughed before, but the laughter had been replaced by something he hadn't expected: attention, respect, maybe even a touch of fear that he had underestimated her. She didn't look at him for long. Her focus was on the piano, on the sound she wanted to create, on the story that lived inside her fingers. Taking a deep breath, she lifted her hands slightly, letting them hover above the keys. The room seemed to hold its breath with her. She could feel it, the collective anticipation pressing in, a weight that could be overwhelming if she let it, but she didn't. Instead, she felt a calm wash over her, a quiet confidence that came from years of practice, of dreaming, of preparing for moments like this. Then, she pressed a single key. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was just one note. But the sound that came from it was pure, perfect, and impossibly clear. It seemed to hang in the air, stretching across the room like sunlight through a window. The tone carried warmth, depth, and a resonance that made the skin tingle. It was simple, yet it felt profound, like a secret being revealed for the first time. The man froze. His mouth, which had been curled into a confident smirk just moments before, slowly fell open. He could hardly believe what he was hearing. The note was perfect, but it wasn't just that. It had something else, an unmistakable emotion that struck directly at the heart. He had expected hesitation, maybe a clumsy chord, perhaps a stumble that would allow him to laugh again. But this was something entirely different. Around the room, the reactions were immediate and uncontrollable. Some people gasped softly, as if the sound had physically surprised them. Others leaned forward, eyes wide, mouths slightly open in disbelief. A few sat frozen, hands clenched in their laps, afraid to breathe too loudly and break the delicate spell the note had created. Even those who had been whispering doubts just moments ago fell silent. The laughter, the skepticism, the casual chatter, all of it had vanished, replaced by a shared astonishment that seemed to vibrate through the very air. She let the note linger for a heartbeat longer, watching the effect it had on the room. It wasn't about showing off or proving anyone wrong. It was about connection. She wanted them to feel the music, to understand the depth of her dedication and the passion that had grown quietly inside her for years. And judging by the expressions around her, she had succeeded. The man finally took a step closer, still stunned. He had thought he understood her, had thought he could judge her by appearances, by quiet demeanor, by her unassuming posture. But one note had shattered all assumptions. He realized that he had been blind to something extraordinary. She wasn't just a casual player or an amateur. She was an artist, someone who could create beauty with a single deliberate touch. A few people whispered to each other, their voices trembling with awe. "Did you hear that? I've never heard a note like that before. It's perfect." Their reactions weren't exaggerated. They were genuine, raw human responses to something unexpectedly beautiful. The young woman smiled slightly, though she didn't move her hands from the keys. She could feel the energy in the room shifting, the tension transforming into admiration. She didn't need to rush. One note had done what hundreds of others might not have achieved. It had captured everyone's attention. It had demanded respect, and it had made them pause in their disbelief. She remembered the countless times she had practiced alone, letting her fingers glide over the piano keys in quiet rooms where no one could hear. She had imagined moments like this, but imagining was never the same as living it. The sound of that single note, echoing in the small hall, was validation of everything she had believed in for so long. All the late nights, all the sacrifices, all the moments of doubt. This was the reward. The man's pride was visibly shaken. He had expected a performance he could dismiss with a laugh or a smug comment, but that note had changed everything. He realized, perhaps for the first time, that talent could not be measured by appearances or casual assumptions. It demanded humility to recognize it, and he was suddenly very aware of his own arrogance. She pressed the key again, letting it resonate briefly, reinforcing the impression she had already made. The sound was deliberate, confident, full of intention. It wasn't about speed or complexity. It was about clarity, about emotion, about the power of simplicity done perfectly. And it worked. The room was captivated, completely under the spell of that single, astonishing sound. Some people shifted. In their seats, others stood straighter, almost unconsciously. The man took another step forward, unable to look away. His smirk was gone entirely now, replaced by an expression of deep reflection. She had forced him and everyone else to reconsider what they thought they knew. One note had done what no argument, no boast, no demonstration could have achieved. It had silenced doubt. The young woman allowed herself a small breath of relief, though her focus never wavered. She knew she had to continue, not to impress further, but to honor the music that had carried her to this moment. That one note had been a statement, a quiet declaration of skill and emotion, and now she could let the music unfold naturally, building on the foundation she had just laid. Even those who had been skeptical before now found themselves leaning closer, drawn in by the authenticity of what they were hearing. There was no showiness, no attempt to dazzle with speed or volume. Every subtle vibration of the key, every carefully measured pause, spoke of years of dedication, of a love for music that ran deeper than any judgment from others. The man finally spoke, though his voice was low and careful. I didn't expect that." There was no mockery, no arrogance, just honesty, a rare acknowledgement of what he had witnessed. His eyes, which had once looked down on her, now held respect, tempered with humility. He had been taught a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Never underestimate someone who quietly hones their craft, even if they seem unassuming. She didn't respond verbally. She didn't need to. Her music was her answer, her words, her proof. And as she prepared to play the next part, she felt a surge of quiet pride. The note had done more than astonish the room. It had proven to herself that she was ready for anything, that her skill, patience, and love for music were undeniable. The audience remained captivated. There were no distractions, no whispers of doubt, no casual glances away. Each person seemed to feel the weight of that note, the care with which it had been played, the passion behind it. Even in that small, ordinary hall, the music created a sense of wonder, a shared recognition that something extraordinary had occurred. She allowed the note to fade completely, letting the silence speak for a moment. It was a silence filled with admiration, curiosity, and awe. And then, almost imperceptibly, a few people began to clap softly, as if testing whether it was real. The sound grew, gradually swelling into genuine applause, but not overwhelming. It was restrained, thoughtful, and deeply sincere. The man's expression softened further. He nodded slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging a truth he hadn't realized before. He had mocked, laughed, and doubted, but one note had humbled him in a way no words ever could. He had seen the power of quiet confidence, the strength of years of dedication, and the impact of pure, unfiltered talent. The young woman felt the energy in the room shift completely. She had been underestimated, doubted, even laughed at. But in a single moment she had claimed her space. That one note had done more than play a sound. It had spoken volumes about who she was and what she could accomplish. And as the last echo of the note faded, she realized something important. She wasn't done. That note had been the spark, the moment that captured everyone's attention. Now the music could continue, flowing freely, building on the astonishment, the admiration, and the newfound respect she had earned. She smiled quietly to herself, her fingers poised for what was next. The room, now fully attentive and expectant, waited with bated breath. The man watched with humility and a touch of awe, and in that quiet hall, with a single perfect note, a moment had been created that none of them would ever forget. The room was electric with anticipation. After that first astonishing note, every person present seemed to be leaning slightly forward, almost as if they could draw the sound directly from the piano. The young woman sat at the black instrument, her fingers resting lightly on the keys, feeling the lingering resonance of the note she had just played. The sound had hung in the air like a delicate mist, filling every corner of the room and leaving a sense of wonder behind. She took a steady breath and closed her eyes for a moment, centering herself. This was no longer just a single note. This was her moment to show the depth of her skill, to let her music tell a story that words could never capture. Years of quiet practice, of dedication and solitude had led to this. Every finger knew its place, every chord was familiar, and every pause was deliberate. Her hands began to move again, slow at first, gentle but precise. The room was so silent that the faintest movement of her fingers seemed to echo like a whisper. The music started softly, almost tenderly, but there was a purpose behind each note, a direction that guided the flow. It wasn't a piece meant to impress with speed or complexity. It was a piece meant to communicate, to reach out to the hearts of those listening. The man who had once laughed at her now stood rigidly, his arms at his sides. His eyes, wide and unblinking, followed every movement of her hands. He could no longer find fault, no longer harbor doubts. The first note had caught him off guard, but the sequence she was now playing revealed a mastery that went beyond expectations. He felt a mix of surprise and admiration he hadn't expected to feel tonight. Around the room, the reactions were varied but unified in awe. Some people's mouths hung slightly open, astonished at the control and emotion in her playing. Others had a faint smile almost involuntarily as they felt the music reaching them. A few people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, as if the piano had the power to erase the walls around them and speak directly to their hearts. Her fingers moved with grace and confidence, striking each note with intention. The piece she had chosen was one she had mastered over countless hours in a quiet, small room at home. It was a composition that demanded attention and respect, one that was beautiful in its simplicity, yet powerful in its impact. Every chord she played seemed to build upon the last, creating a tapestry of sound that was both intricate and natural. She allowed herself a small smile as she played, not because she was proud of proving anyone wrong, but because she loved this moment, loved the connection between her and the piano, loved the ability to communicate without speaking. Each note was a message, a reflection of her journey, her dedication, and her love for music. The man's expression had softened completely. His earlier arrogance had dissolved, replaced by something more human, humility and awe. He had expected a performance that could be dismissed with a casual remark, but now he realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. This was not simply talent. This was artistry, patience and passion converging in a single person. The room seemed to shrink around her as she continued. She was aware of every listener, every reaction, but she didn't let it distract her. The music flowed naturally from her fingers, guided by the memories of every late night, every misplayed chord, every moment she had spent refining her craft in silence. She was fully present, completely immersed, and the room felt the energy she projected. A few people whispered softly among themselves, though no one tried to interrupt. "She's amazing. I've never heard anything like this before. It's like the piano itself is speaking through her." Their voices carried a mixture of disbelief and admiration. Even those who had been skeptical before now found themselves leaning in, caught by the spell of the music. Her hands moved faster now, not recklessly, but with a controlled intensity. The piece had a section that required both precision and emotion, and she navigated it perfectly. Each note rang clear and true, yet it carried subtle inflections that spoke of human experience, joy, longing, hope, and quiet determination. It was as if the piano had become an extension of herself, and through it she was sharing a part of her soul with everyone present. The man could no longer hide his astonishment. He had thought skill was enough, that talent could be measured by appearances and casual observation. But this was different. This was artistry, dedication, and heart all wrapped into one. One note had surprised him, yes, but the piece she was now playing revealed the depth of her abilities, the extent of her commitment, and the truth of her talent. The audience's reactions grew more animated, though still respectful. Some clapped softly after particularly moving passages, while others leaned back slightly, absorbing the sound, almost in disbelief. There was laughter too, quiet and incredulous, not of mockery but of wonder. The room had transformed from a casual gathering into a stage, a space where music spoke louder than any words could. She allowed herself to feel a small thrill of joy as she played. It was not about ego or proving someone wrong. It was about the experience, the connection, and the power of her own abilities. Every chord, every pause, every delicate touch of the keys was deliberate, a reflection of years of effort and unwavering passion. The man shifted his stance, his pride humbled, his mind working to understand what he had just witnessed. He could feel a quiet lesson settling within him, that talent and dedication are not always visible on the surface, and that even the quietest person can hold extraordinary power. He had laughed, yes, but now he realized that laughter had been premature. She reached the final section of the piece, a passage that required both speed and clarity, and executed it flawlessly. Her fingers moved with such precision and grace that the audience could barely keep up, yet the music never felt rushed or forced. Every note was intentional, every chord full of life and expression. It was a demonstration of skill, yes, but also a reflection of the emotions she carried, the quiet confidence, the patience, and the love for what she did. As the last notes faded, the room stayed silent for a heartbeat, as if none of them wanted to disturb the lingering magic. And then, as if breaking a spell, the applause began. It started softly, hesitant, but quickly grew louder, filling the hall with genuine appreciation and admiration. The sound was not just for the music, but for the courage, dedication, and talent that had created it. The man's eyes glistened slightly as he clapped, his face soft with acknowledgement. He could not deny the power of what he had just witnessed, and in that moment, he understood something essential. Talent, passion, and determination could not be judged lightly, and sometimes the most extraordinary people were those who had been quiet all along. She let herself sit back for a moment, breathing deeply. Her hand still rested on the keys, but the intensity had passed. She felt a quiet pride, not from the applause, but from the knowledge that she had shared herself fully, honestly, and without fear. The music had spoken and it had been heard. The audience, now fully engaged and deeply moved, began to talk quietly among themselves, their voices filled with awe. "I've never seen anything like that. Her talent is unbelievable. It's incredible how she stayed so calm and precise." The admiration was sincere, the astonishment genuine. She had captivated them not just with skill, but with presence, passion, and honesty. Even the man who had doubted her at first could not contain his respect. He approached her slightly, still clapping softly, and nodded. There was no need for words between them. The acknowledgement was clear. She had proven herself through music, not confrontation, not argument, but through the pure, undeniable power of her talent. She finally allowed herself to relax fully. The piece was finished, but the effect lingered in the air like a sweet perfume, filling the room and settling into the hearts of those who had listened. She had faced doubt, skepticism, and mockery, yet she had responded not with words but with music. And in doing so, she had made an impression that would not soon be forgotten. As she rose from the piano, the applause continued, growing in warmth and sincerity. She smiled softly, her heart light but full, knowing that the night had been a turning point. She had revealed herself not just as a musician, but as someone with passion, skill, and quiet strength. And in that moment she realized that the journey she had begun alone in a small room at home had led her to something much greater. Recognition, respect, and the knowledge that her music could touch others in ways she had only dreamed of. The applause had died down, but the energy in the room did not fade. People were still talking quietly, their voices filled with admiration and awe. Some were discussing the music itself, marveling at her precision and emotion. Others were reflecting on the way she had carried herself, calm and confident despite the earlier doubts. The room felt transformed, as though the music had changed not only the space but the people within it. She sat back on the piano bench for a moment, letting herself breathe fully. Her hands were still lightly touching the keys, almost as if she could feel the lingering vibrations from the notes she had played. Her heart was pounding, but it was not from fear or anxiety. It was from exhilaration. She had faced judgment, skepticism, and laughter, and yet she had proven through the pure power of her music that she belonged here. That she could command attention not by words but by the depth of her talent and the honesty of her expression. The man who had laughed at her before was standing not far away. He looked different now. His posture, once relaxed in arrogance, was straight but humble. His eyes, which had once been sharp with judgment, now held a soft, thoughtful glow. He had learned a lesson in humility, a quiet understanding that talent and dedication cannot be measured by first impressions or outward appearances. He approached her slowly, not wanting to intrude, but feeling the need to acknowledge what had happened. That was incredible," he said softly, almost unsure of his own voice. There was no mockery, no laughter, only sincerity. He had been wrong to underestimate her, and he recognized it now. His words were simple, but the meaning behind them was profound. He had learned to respect the quiet strength and dedication of someone who had worked tirelessly in private, while the world was unaware. She smiled gently, her fingers still resting on the keys. "Thank you," she replied quietly. Her voice was soft, but it carried the calm assurance of someone who had faced doubt and emerged unshaken. She did not need to boast or argue. The music had already spoken for her. Her performance had said what words never could, and now the acknowledgement from the man felt like a quiet confirmation of what she already knew. Her talent was real, and it was undeniable. The other people in the room were approaching her slowly, their expressions a mix of awe and admiration. Some were offering compliments, others were simply shaking their heads in disbelief. "I've never heard anything like that," one person said. "You have a gift," another added. The young woman accepted each compliment with grace, her demeanor humble but proud. She had never sought attention, but she understood now that sharing her gift could inspire others, and that was a feeling she cherished more than praise itself. As the crowd began to disperse, the atmosphere remained charged with excitement. Conversations continued about her performance, about the astonishing note, and about the full piece she had played afterward. People were not just impressed, they were inspired. They had witnessed the power of dedication, the beauty of quiet confidence, and the impact of pure talent expressed without pretense. She remained at the piano for a moment longer, allowing herself to reflect on the evening. She remembered the long hours of practice, the late nights alone in a small room, the moments when she had doubted herself and wondered if all the effort was worth it. Now, looking at the faces of those who had been astonished, she realized that every moment had led to this. Every mistake, every repetition, every solitary practice session had prepared her for this night. The man, now standing beside her, watched her quietly for a few seconds before speaking again. "I misjudged you," he said simply. "I thought you were just ordinary, but what you did, it's extraordinary." His tone carried the weight of genuine understanding. He had experienced a moment of humility that many never encounter, a moment where he realized that assumptions can blind even the most confident person. She nodded slightly, acknowledging his words without pride or arrogance. "I've always loved playing," she said softly. "I never did it to prove anything to anyone. I just practiced and I let the music guide me." Her words were simple, yet they held a quiet power. She had demonstrated that true skill comes from passion, dedication, and authenticity, not from seeking approval or recognition. As the crowd continued to leave, she felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond any applause or compliments. She had shared a piece of herself, her dedication, and her love for music with people who had doubted her. In that moment, she realized that the greatest reward was not the acknowledgement itself, but the fact that she had stayed true to herself. She had trusted her abilities, followed her passion, and allowed the music to speak for her. The man lingered for a moment longer, clearly processing everything he had witnessed. I need to rethink a lot of things," he admitted quietly. "I've been too quick to judge. You've shown me something I'll never forget." His words carried sincerity, and she could sense the change in him, a shift from arrogance to respect, from judgment to appreciation. He had learned a lesson that could stay with him for a lifetime, one that only moments like this can teach. She smiled gently and returned her attention to the piano, letting her hands rest lightly on the keys. The evening had been a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone who had witnessed it. The room that had once been filled with doubt and judgment had transformed into a space of admiration, respect, and inspiration. She had not only demonstrated her talent, but she had also reminded everyone that dedication and passion often live quietly, waiting for the right moment to shine. As she left the hall later that night, she felt a sense of calm confidence she had never experienced before. The memory of the astonished faces, the silent awe, and the heartfelt applause lingered in her mind. She knew that this was just the beginning of her journey. There would be more challenges, more moments of doubt, and more opportunities to prove herself, not to others, but to herself. She had discovered the power of patience, persistence, and authenticity, and that knowledge would guide her in every step she took forward. Over the next few days, the memory of the performance spread quietly through her circle. People who had been present shared their astonishment with friends, family, and colleagues. They spoke not just of the technical skills she displayed, but of the courage and composure she had shown under scrutiny. Her talent was no longer hidden, and the recognition she had earned was genuine, heartfelt, and lasting. The man who had doubted her reached out later, not with arrogance or competition, but with a gesture of respect. He acknowledged the mistake he had made in underestimating her, and he expressed genuine admiration for her dedication and skill. Their interaction was not about rivalry, but about acknowledgement of talent and effort, a reminder that true recognition comes from understanding and respect, rather than judgment or pride. For her, the impact of the performance was even more personal. She had proven to herself that her efforts, her patience, and her passion were worth every sacrifice. The journey she had taken from practicing alone in a quiet room to playing in front of an audience had been challenging, but the outcome had been transformative. She had gained confidence, self-respect, and a sense of purpose that could not be shaken by doubt or criticism. The experience also taught her an important lesson about humility and human connection. She realized that people often judge too quickly, that assumptions can cloud perception, and that true understanding comes from seeing dedication and passion in action. She had experienced firsthand how a single performance could change perceptions, inspire others, and create lasting respect. As weeks and months passed, The memory of that evening remained vivid in her mind. The applause, the astonishment, and the respect she had earned became a source of motivation. She continued to practice diligently, not to impress anyone, but to honor her craft and the love she had for music. Each day she pushed herself to improve, knowing that her talent was a gift that deserved nurturing and care. She also noticed changes in the people around her. The man who had once laughed at her approached her with more respect and curiosity, eager to learn about the dedication and patience behind her skill. Others who had been skeptical found themselves inspired by her example, reconsidering their assumptions and developing a deeper appreciation for talent, effort, and authenticity. The impact of her performance extended beyond that one night. It became a turning point in her life, a moment she would remember and draw strength from whenever challenges arose. She had faced doubt, mockery, and skepticism, yet she had responded with courage, grace, and unwavering focus. The lesson she learned was simple yet profound. True talent cannot be hidden forever, and when nurtured with dedication and passion, it will inevitably shine. Looking back, she realized that the evening had been more than a performance. It had been a revelation. She had shown herself what she was capable of, and in doing so, she had inspired others to reconsider their judgments and recognize the quiet power of dedication. It was a night that would remain with her for a lifetime, a testament to patience, skill, and the courage to believe in oneself. As she continued her journey, she carried with her the memory of astonished faces, sincere applause, and the profound realization that passion, persistence, and authenticity are more powerful than doubt or judgment. She had not only played music, she had played a part in changing perceptions, inspiring others, and affirming the truth of her own abilities. That evening had been a turning point, a moment when one note, followed by a short, powerful piece, had revealed the extraordinary within the ordinary, the hidden strength behind quiet determination, and the lasting impact of courage expressed through art.